I'm Maria Malaguti, the Executive Director at the Lyme Disease Resource Center. And tonight we have guest Alison Hayes as part of our educational series. Alison is the founder and driving force behind her coaching business, Thriving While Disabled. Her book, Thriving While Disabled, Navigating Disability Finances, has evolved from her blog. Her business has expanded to encompass coaching, training, educational materials that help people with disabilities navigate the many broken systems which make their lives difficult. The goal of her business is to empower her fellow disabled folks to know and protect their rights, recognize their worthiness as human beings, and find their own path to purpose. Her wish is that you can thrive while managing society's perception and treatment of you as a person with a disability. Alison and her partner, Alvaro, live in New Jersey with their cats, one of whom is also chronically ill, and enjoy watching horror movies together. She's also a big reader of science fiction and fantasy books. Welcome, Alison, and thank you so much for sharing with our clients this very important topic.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. So one other little bit of housekeeping I want to mention is the primary disabling condition that I have is called functional neurological disorder. And in my case, it expresses as muscle movements. So it's possible some point during this talk, you'll see my hand moving strangely or me rocking a little, things like that. That's part of my FND, and it's nothing to be worried about. I just like to give that little disclaimer ahead of time so nobody gets anxious if they see me getting a little symptomatic. So today we are going to talk about Social Security. I know that gets really scary. And I want to share, first of all, why am I doing this in the first place? The reason I'm doing this is because I successfully got on Social Security first try back in 2004 when a few years after my diagnosis with functional neurological disorder. And it was really hard then. And I know things have gotten even harder since then. So between getting on first try and the way my brain works, really liking to know and understand how systems work, I ended up eventually kind of falling into finding myself helping people do things like this. And I was helped into this by my partner who is also dealt with multiple disabling things. And when I got him through some of his medical crises, he pointed out just how knowledgeable I was and how well I understood these things. So I took all that to heart. And after we both recovered from a major crisis on his part, I threw myself into initially blogging and then shifting into more of a coaching position. First thing I have to say about Social Security disability, it is hard, and people will pretty accurately describe the application process as soul crushing. It just is. So the first thing to know going in is it's not you. It really isn't easy. So for a lot of people, just getting started is very overwhelming. And that's part of why I have a coaching service too. Basically, the way that the whole thing works, because we very often refer to it as disability, but don't talk about what that actually means, is Social Security actually has two separate programs designed to help people living with disabilities. And those two programs are Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, and Supplemental Security Income, or SSI. They actually have the exact same application process, but what you get on them is different. For people collecting SSDI, that is for people who have a work history and who've worked recently enough to still be eligible to collect those benefits before they retire. Generally, that time period is 5 out of the previous 10 years, but it's used based on work credits, and you earn work credits every quarter that you are employed. If you have enough work credits recently enough, you can be eligible for SSDI benefits. If you don't have enough work credits, you may be eligible for the supplemental security income, but that payment is it's a relatively static number. Everybody who gets SSI payments has the same base amount, and some states will supplement that payment. The Social Security Disability Insurance, that SSDI, those payments are based on your work history, and you can earn different amounts of money for being on SSDI. Unfortunately, the numbers they have for this are ridiculously wide. The range for eligibility for SSDI, as far as the payments per month, can be anywhere from $300 to a bit over $3,000. The only way to know how much you individually might be eligible for on SSDI is to go to Social Security's website, ssa.gov, log in, and look at your Social Security statement. On that, it will actually say if you were to become disabled or if you were to retire now, and it'll say how much money you would get. And that's a monthly amount. So for each person, the amount will be different, but the average is about $1,500 a month right now. Again, some people are going to be very high, some people are going to be very low. The other part is if you're on the very low end, many people who get those SSI payments who get those SSDI very low payments can also get SSI payments to supplement and bring you up to the amount that SSI pays. And SSI, the national number is a bit over $900. I want to say 941. I'm just double checking. Yeah, about 941 a month. And then individual states can add to and supplement that. The other big thing to understand is eligibility, because people assume that you're only eligible if you're completely 100% unable to work. And the reality is a little more nuanced. There's actually an amount called substantial gainful activity. If you earn over substantial gainful activity, you are ineligible for disability benefits, no matter how disabled you are. And that's just earned income. I'm not talking about unearned income. I'm talking about earned income that you personally earn. The substantial gainful activity right now is about $2,700 for blind people. For everybody else, it is for 2025, $1,620 a month. So if you right now have an earned income under $1,620 a month and can't earn more due to your disability, you potentially could apply for disability right now, just with where you're at. If you do, Social Security will grill you on why you can't work more. But if you've got good medical care and good medical records, you may actually be able to get the benefits while bringing in that money and not lose either the job or the benefits. That is not the easiest path to take, but I want to let you know it exists. So that's kind of give you that picture of money. The other big thing that these programs cover, besides money, is health insurance, which is also very, very essential for our survival. Um, Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI, provides Medicare coverage. So the same coverage that other Social Security recipients get. So retirees and disabled people who have a long-term work history and a recent work history will end up getting SSDI and Medicare. SSI comes with Medicaid, which is your state-run program for disability for medical care. So that is a significant difference. There are two different ways for people to switch over from SSI to SSDI. One of those ways is if they work while disabled and earn enough points to get themselves eligible for SSDI again. The other is what is called the disabled adult child benefits. Somebody had asked a question about that before this conversation, and so I just want to let you know, disabled adult child benefits are specifically for people who became disabled before the age of 22. And so do not have work history of their own. What they can do, though, is as their parents retire or pass on, they can become eligible for their parents' Social Security benefits. And that means that instead of being on Medicaid, they go on to Medicare. And it means that they get somewhere between 50 and 75% of what their parents are or were getting from Social Security. I just want to give you that image so you see how that works. So SSDI, Medicare, SSI, Medicaid. So again, the big thing on the income front is the disability programs in this country are very focused on the inability to reliably earn substantial income. So anytime you earn too much, you are ineligible, whether that too much is happening before you apply or while you're collecting. I want to make you really aware of that because that's how many people end up losing their benefits, because they start feeling a little better and they start working a bit and they don't understand what the limits are. And then they end up going over the limit and lose their benefits either immediately, which is bad, or eventually, which is actually worse, because then you're dealing with what's called government clawbacks, where Social Security not only stops your coverage, but wants you to repay them the money that you got that they felt you weren't eligible for. Clawbacks have become very popular lately. And so it's something to be very aware of. I also heard people asking questions about protecting themselves right now. And one of those ways to protect yourself is by being aware of what you're doing and making absolutely sure you're staying within those limits. Though I will say the other big thing to be aware of as far as the current administration is it's not worth focusing on what might happen. It's more important to be aware of and focus on what's happening right now and what you know. There's always going to be uncertainty in life, and it isn't worth worrying about a problem until that problem exists. So I don't want people to get too stressed out on that particular front, because there's only so many things in life we can control. I like to say I take all the things I can't control, put them in a box, lock it up, put it in the corner. I might have to go out and look at it every once in a while, but most of the time, It's in the box in the corner, so I don't stress myself out about it.
Allison,
Yep,
we have a question from the audience.
absolutely.
How does the maximum 1620 per month earned income work for people who are married? Is the 1620 only for the worker, the disabled worker, or is it for how much the spouse earns as well?
Okay, that will depend on the program. SSDI only cares about you personally. They do not care how many assets you have. They do not care what your spouse earns if you're married. They just don't care. Everything that they do is entirely 100% about what you, the disabled individual, does and earns. They do not care if you have a lot of money. They only care if you are actively working now. So, like, for example, if you had some kind of retirement fund or if you were investing in the stock market, that's not considered earned income for this purpose. And so it wouldn't be counted against you. The only thing that's counted against you is employment type work, including self employment, but employment type work. There's actually also another number called the trial work level, which for people who are collecting SSDI is the amount of money that you earn after which they start counting down to cut you off from benefits. The trial work level this year is, I think 11, I'm double checking my notes, $1,160. The way the trial work level works is once you start working again, Social Security wants to know you're working, wants to know your income. Anything below the trial work level, you could earn that forever with no problem. Once it's above that trial work level, though, it counts as what they call a trial work month. You're given 9 trial work months in a year. You're given 9 trial work months, period. If you, once you work that ninth month, then they consider you no longer, they consider you moving into the next step of getting off of disability, which is called your extended period of eligibility, where if you earn over substantial gainful activity, you get $0. If you earn under, you get your full check. SSDI is very much an all or nothing, which is what can be very scary about it. You either get all of your check or you get no check. And if they make a mistake on whether you should get a check or not, eventually they're going to want to take the money back. And they hold you responsible for their error. So you, as an individual, it's your responsibility to keep very good records of what you earn, when you earn it, and when and how each step of this of the process starts and ends. I do want people to know also that after the extended period of eligibility, you stay eligible for what they call expedited reinstatement for 5 years after that 3-year extended period of eligibility. And even beyond that, if you get worse, have a relapse, are unable to work, it's relatively easy to get back onto disability. You don't go through the whole process again. I do think it's really important to be aware that once you're on it, even if you started working the day after you got your benefits, you would have 8 years of protection if you became unable to work again. But you just have to keep track of all of that because Social Security does not hold themselves responsible for tracking that information. It is your responsibility to prove when your income changed and what your eligibility was. You have to prove it to them, not the other way around. So it's just, I want you to be aware of that.
So
People,
I have a question in here, or
sure,
three
sure,
questions
sure,
that relate to what you're talking about. And I
absolutely.
think you've answered one of them, talking about can you make under the gainful amount you spoke about without it be considered the trial work period? So that was one
Right.
question.
If you stay, as long as you stay below that trial work level, which, like I said, is a little over $1,100, it's 1160, I think. As long as you stay under that amount and report it and can prove it, and that's if you're working for somebody, we're talking your gross income, not what you take home, what's on the check, what they agree they're going to pay you before taxes are removed. If you're self-employed, it's the other way. They look at your net income, not your gross.
So that also relates to, is it worth doing the trial work month if you know you're not well enough to go back to work full time?
So if you know you're not well enough to go back to work full time, your goal should be to live under that trial work level for unless or until you feel like you can afford to stop your benefits. Because once you're over that amount, it's 9 months. And that's not 9 months in a row. That's any 9 months in a roll. The way they term it, don't blame me, it's how they term it, is a rolling 5-year basis. That translates into if you use up one trial work month, you do not get them restarted unless you do not work at all for 5 years after that trial work month is over. And if you work a second trial work month, the clock starts all over again. So you want to protect those trial work months, which is the mistake a lot of people make because they don't even know they exist. I certainly didn't when I first got on benefits. I found out the hard way when I uh, stopped working and then started working again and hadn't realized I'd used up my full trial work period and had actually used up my entire extended period of eligibility. And so when I started working again, they were like, right, so you're not getting any benefits anymore. And I had to go in and beg and plead and change all of the work that I was doing, cut my hours back down so that I could get my benefits reinstated. Trust me, you do not want to have to do that. You wouldn't have wanted to do that before this administration. You definitely do not want to be doing that now. So that's why I'm telling you about these numbers. So if you know you're not going to be able to work full time and support yourself, you want to stay under that trial work level, not just stay under substantial gainful activity, or the countdown will start to have your benefits end.
So the third question,
Yep, yep.
and I think I know the answer to this. Um, is it possible to become eligible for SSI after already being eligible for and receiving SSDI, say if your assets got spent down? So how does that work?
Okay, so it's okay. So SSI is only for people who are very low income and have very, very few assets. And when I mean low, I mean assets have to be below $2,000 for a single person and $3,000 for a couple. Um, However, I suspect what the person's really concerned about is Medicaid coverage as opposed to Medicare. There is a term called dual eligibility, which is being eligible for both Medicare and Medicaid. It is also possible to collect both SSI and SSDI if your SSDI payments are low enough. So if your SSDI payments, the monthly payments, are under that 940-ish or whatever your state amount is, then you can get the SSI payments to bring you up to that number. If you're on the SSI or you're otherwise eligible for Medicaid, you can be dual eligible, get Medicare and Medicaid. And if that happens, your Medicaid actually pays your Medicare costs, as well as having access to the Medicaid program. And usually that means that your drug costs go down considerably too. For that reason, there are people who, if their Medicare amount is very close to that boundary, will intentionally put themselves on savings programs and other programs that exist that pull some of their money out every month for usually things like job training or special equipment that make it possible for them to work, things like that, so that they become SSI and Medicaid eligible. So that is the wiggle room that exists. But in general, SSDI and Medicare coverage are considered superior in most ways to Medicaid coverage. So if you find yourself having no assets and your SSDI payments are lower than your state's SSI payments, you can apply for SSI. And usually if you're already on SSDI, you've already passed the hard part. You just have to prove that you're financially eligible. I do recommend when people apply for Social Security that they actually check off that they're applying for both SSDI and SSI, because that way they will be granted both in a pretty similar time frame instead of having to go through the application process again if they're rejected for SSDI but eligible for SSI or vice versa. So it's messy, but it is manageable. And the people who are on both, that's because their SSDI payments are that low. Because I remember somebody else talking about having a question related to that eligibility type issue. If your SSDI payments are that low, yes, you can get both. Yeah. Do we have another? Oh, okay. Reporting income. So with SSI, Social Security has a site where they want you to put it. With SSI, they need it reported every single month, because the way that SSI works is you have that base amount of money. As soon as you earn more than $85, they start reducing your check. They reduce the check $1 for every $2 you earn over that $85 allowance. So people in SSI, they have to report at the beginning of every single month what they did the last month so that their check for the month reflects their earned income. SSDI, like I said, they don't care so much. And it's very on or off. Either you get payments or you don't. And so they're not going to check on you monthly, and they don't expect you to report monthly. I found forms that you can fill out to report about every 3 months. But basically, what's more important than you reporting to them, which absolutely, basically you mail it into them because they haven't created a better system. What's more important is that you have the records and you make sure that you're filing your taxes so they know. If you're coming anywhere close to your trial work level, it's especially important to have those records. And it's especially important to send in the letter saying, hey, this is how much I'm earning. because then you're going to get closer and closer to that cutoff point. If you're earning underneath, the main thing is make sure that your records are good and make sure you're filing taxes so they can see those numbers. Does that make sense? It's messy, like I said, but this is how it works. The next big topic I want to talk about, as long as you're earning under that trial work level, which is 1160-ish, as long as you're under the trial work level, you are not going, it's not going to count as a trial work period. That's what matters. You want to stay under and make sure that the records show it. So if you've got an employer, you want that information there. You want to make sure your employer is filing all their paperwork, and you want to be prepared filing your taxes and sending off proof to Social Security. That one, the citizenship question is a little more than I feel comfortable answering. That may be a question for a lawyer, but that also may be really impacted by the current administration. I would completely understand you being hesitant and concerned. Yeah, as an immigrant. SSDI payments actually do go up pretty much every year. It's called the cost of living allowance, COLA, COLA. And so COLA amounts are that are basically a small percentage. They go up. It's based on a combination of, it's basically based loosely on inflation. It takes how much the cost of living has gone up roughly and increases everybody who collects Social Security's payment amount by that. That's also how the SSI payments go up too, based on the COLA type things. I would like to move to the next topic, which is, let's talk about the medical part of proving your eligibility for disability. The medical part is going to be tough, especially among those of us who have non-apparent conditions. I know I've been through it. Social Security doesn't actually care what your diagnosis is that much. What they actually really care about is your symptoms. People with the exact same condition, one can be approved, the other can be denied. That happens all the time. And the reason that happens is because the person who got approved was able to show that their symptoms made it impossible for them to do any job. Along those lines, it doesn't matter whether or not you could do the job you trained to do or the job you started in. What matters is your ability to do any work at all. Social Security is not like long-term disability. Long-term disability is about your ability to do the job you were hired to do. Social Security is focused on your ability to do or take or keep any job whatsoever. And unfortunately, their job database is more than slightly out of date. They often will reference jobs that were around in the early to mid 70s. The tables that they use have not been updated very much or very consistently. So they may even reject you because you can't do a job that no longer exists. Just want to put that out there. So your job as an applicant is to make sure that your medical records prove that you are not able to do any job on a full-time basis. That is going to be the key. That is what's going to win your case. The combination of you and your doctor showing you can't do any job. And while you're in that process, you also, when you're filling out the supplementary paperwork, you need to make all of the information you share be somewhat detached, be very like scientifically kind of rigorous. You want to give details. You can't say it depends. You have to say, I can walk 5 steps to the bathroom and that's it. Or say, I can walk for 1 mile, but then I can't do anything else the rest of the day. Or whatever it is your condition does in response to their specific questions that they're asking. You and your doctor need to be working together to describe your symptoms, describe how they've determined that you can't work. You need your doctor to be on board when you apply for disability because they need to be ready to back you up. Now, if your doctor is like, I'd like to help you, but I don't know what I need to say, there's actually a guide for that. It's called the Blue Book. And the Blue Book is a medical professional's guide to explain how one or more systems in your body are failing to work. And they have very concrete guidelines for what the doctor needs to prove for your case for disability to have a good chance of success. If you only have one system impacted, it's you either pass or you don't. And so your doctor has to prove all of the points. If you have multiple systems impacted, then it's about proving that the combination of all of those together leaves you too disabled to work. And if you do a Google search of the Blue Book and Social Security, you will find that wealth of knowledge. The thing to be aware of, it's all written in that combination of medical jargon and legalese. So it will not be easy for you to interpret, but a doctor or other medical professional can read and interpret it pretty well and have a good sense of how well they could put together that argument. I'm not saying force your doctor to read it. That's not going to help you. But if your doctor says, I'd like to help you, but I don't know what I need to say, there's a piece of guidance for you and your doctor to help determine your likelihood of being eligible. The important thing is having good records, having consistent records, and continuing to go to the doctor. I know it can be unaffordable. I know we can have a lot of medical trauma. Unfortunately, for Social Security, they really only want to hear from people who have MD or DO or PsyD after their names. They don't really want to hear what your physical therapist has to say. They don't really want to hear what your massage therapist has to say. They don't want to hear what your Reiki practitioner has to say. They want to hear from the people who have the titles that they recognize. So you need to see the people whose titles they recognize and have those people be ready to go to bat for you, send their medical records, and be ready to defend you. Does that make sense so far?
We have some questions.
Okay. Absolutely. I do want to add that it also is essential that you not only see the right people, but also that you're doing what the right people are telling you to do. So if you are not taking the medication you're supposed to, if you're not following the best practices your doctor is telling you to do without a good reason, anything like that, that's going to reflect badly on your case. I also remember getting a question about is my diagnosis acceptable for Social Security? Social Security, again, cares more about your symptoms, but they do have what's called the compassionate care list, which again, search that name, it'll pop. The compassionate care list is basically the list of conditions that if you have that diagnosis, you are so incapacitated or close to death that they will let you on, because if you went through the process, you'd probably be dead before they finished. Or you just so incapacitated that if you have that diagnosis, you're shoe in automatically on it. You don't want to be on the compassionate care list. So just want to make that clear. If you happen to be on the compassionate care list, sure, use that and it'll speed up the process. But the compassionate care list is not a list you really want to be on. And fortunately, Lyme, long COVID, FND, and a lot of the conditions I heard mentioned are not on that list. And again, that's one of those, okay, that's good. So questions.
Questions.
Mhm.
So I see two questions that are similar
Mhm.
about is it better to go with primary care doctor or a holistic doctor? And I'm assuming that's a functional medicine or naturopathic doctor.
Um, they actually don't love having your primary care practitioner being their main source of information. They really prefer you seeing a specialist. So, like for me, the most important information, um, because I have a neurological condition, was hearing from my neurologist. I enclosed information about the psychiatrists and psychologists I was seeing because my condition's right on the boundary between neurology and psychiatry. And at the time that I applied, it was actually, it required both to be diagnosed. Um, I also included information about the doctors who I went to see while trying to figure out what was wrong, because that showed that I had a persistent condition that required me to keep seeing doctors. So I had a couple of urologists in there because I had urinary symptoms and things like that. Um, that's the kind of information that they're going to want most. Um, so even if you don't tend to prefer going to those kinds of doctors, you're going to need to go at least once or twice so that they can affirm your diagnosis and so that they can affirm you're not doing anything that would make your treatment or management harder. Um, Holistic medicine is anything that's not conservative. I don't know a better term than that, but anything that's not like conventional medicine, conventional Western medicine. Yeah.
Allopathic.
Yeah. They're not going to be a big fan. That doesn't mean don't put any information from them down, but that's not who they can be. Support witnesses. They shouldn't be your primary your primary person that you list first, I guess is the best way to put that. Might it help if they're on the edge? Maybe. But that's not going to be what makes your case.
What about nurse practitioners?
Nurse practitioners, if that's who you need to write the detailed letter, see if they can get the MD they work with to sign off on it or otherwise back them up, because unfortunately that bias is going to prove true there too. It's not that I think there's anything bad about nurse practitioners. I don't think there's anything. I've got a great nurse practitioner who's managing my medications. Social Security is not going to look on what they say with as much weight as they would with somebody with an MD or a DO. That's just their bias. And the better you recognize that that's their bias and this is the game you have to play, the better off you are. Because then that also doesn't mean you don't have to question your treatment methods. You just have to check the right boxes for Social Security to accept what you're doing. And I think that's a key thing to separate out in your mind right away. There's what you need to do to take care of yourself, and there's what you need to do to get on disability. And it's really nice when those two lists are the same. But just because they aren't doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It just means they have their ways and they have their biases, and you have to cater to them because they're the ones who decide if you're disabled enough.
There's another question.
Absolutely.
Someone has multiple diagnoses. Is there any one medical issue that's given more consideration than others?
Again, it's going to be about your symptoms, not your diagnoses. List all of your diagnoses. Show that you have collected a collection of labels, all of which say you're not okay. Then what you need to do is give information from every doctor who treats each of your conditions. If you want to start and focus on something, focus on whatever is the most debilitating. Like, I have functional neurological disorder, depression, anxiety, and migraines. My depression, my anxiety, my migraines are not why I got on disability. My F&D is. However, my F&D has been made more complicated by those other conditions. It's harder for it to be treated. It's harder for it to be managed. So take some time before you get deep in the weeds to think about, if one of them went away, would you be able to work? And whichever one you give the most definitive no to, that's your primary focus on your answers. That's the doctor it's most important to get the information from, etc. And kind of give yourself a mental list of what is most debilitating and use that as your guideline. Talk about all of them because it's the combination that makes it worse. I know somebody who has multiple conditions and the management tools are at odds with each other. One condition, she's supposed to stretch. Another condition, she's not supposed to stretch. Okay, what does she do? That kind of contraindications can help make your case, because if I try to treat this condition, I make this condition work. Now what? Worse. Now what? But again, you have to lay these things out so they're super obvious. And every point in your application, you need to reinforce this. You're telling a story with your information. You want your story to be as clear and as unmuddled as possible. Gather your data, put the pieces together so that they can't help but see the story you want them to see. I'm not talking about lying. I'm not talking about being dishonest. I am talking about thinking about what you focus on, what you write most about, what you make sure they got the medical evidence about. Make sure that whatever's most debilitating is top of the list, and then prioritize down. All right. So yeah, it's a lot. And I know it's a lot. But those are the important steps. And again, thing to hang on to. Like, people get on disability without a diagnosis sometimes. And sometimes that's because they have such a rare condition. And sometimes it's because the doctors just can't figure it out. You can get You can get on disability even without a diagnosis or without everything diagnosed. But if you don't have proof that your condition is debilitating, no matter what your diagnoses are, you're not going to get on. Along those lines, I want to talk to you guys about a really important intersection here, which is disability and poverty. Along with this is like a sense of failure, which really, unfortunately, goes with both. We live in an ableist society. All of the messages we have been exposed to all of our lives, unless we have very intentionally gone out searching for alternatives, has been ableist. The messages society builds are about disability as failure, about disability as inability, about disability meaning worthlessness. That is the messaging we have absorbed. And that is also the messaging the people who are making these decisions have absorbed. And the message that the people who designed the paperwork have absorbed. So every step of the application for disability process is steeped in ableism, which means they're looking for you to prove that you are a sad, sad failure of a human being. It is horrible to say, and I really wish that wasn't the case, but that's how this stuff is designed. Whether it's intentional or not is a whole other debate, but that is how it is designed. The other part is you heard the numbers I've mentioned. They're low. These are not numbers that you can have a really great, expensive life on. These are maybe survival level amounts of money. You can hope that it's survival level. You can't expect it to be much above that. And that goes back to that message of poverty, of failure, of disability as failure. There's a very, very strong connection between disability and poverty. And that's because most people who become disabled end up heading towards poverty or being in it or being pushed towards it. It isn't right and it isn't fair, but again, that is the reality that we're dealing with. We live in a society that is full of that pull yourself up by your bootstraps imagery here in the US, and that highly values work as a primary identity. Think about conversations you have with people. They usually start when you're meeting a new person. So, what do you do for a living? That is a really tough and painful question to be asked or to try to answer as a disabled person. So, when you think about applying for disability, understand this is going to be hitting all of these sore points. Every aspect of the application is going to be hitting you in these very sensitive areas. And again, you have to separate that from who you are as a person. Because when you're filling out that application, what you need to do is give this detailed but succinct description and explanation of some of the most horrible experiences of your life. The two biggest parts of that Social Security needs are they need to know about your medical history and they need to know about your activities of daily living. Both of these are big, big sore points as a disabled person. The medical stuff I've talked about, basically, when you start the online application, there's going to be a collection of places for you to enter the information about every doctor you've ever seen, every treatment you've ever tried, every surgery, every operation, every test. The more thorough you are, the better your odds are for getting on disability, because you're giving them more and more proof that you needed help and that you sought it out, because they only think you need help if they can see that you sought it out. Of course, writing all this down tends to be painful because you're reliving, oh God, that was when I knew things were wrong. Oh, that was such a horrible experience. I wish I'd never seen that doctor. And all of those emotions. So even filling out the initial paperwork can be a very triggering and emotional journey. If you go in knowing that in advance, you're not going to blame yourself for it. You're going to recognize it for what it is, which is, this is painful stuff. And it's being asked often in a confusing way, in a complicated way, in a poorly worded way. And you have to go into it going, these people have probably not seen doctors as much as I have. They have not had the medical trauma I may have had. They don't understand what it means to see a doctor beyond your regular checkups. That's the people who wrote these forms. And that's why they're written really badly and make all kinds of assumptions that are wrong if you're managing a disability. And so you have to go in like your mental armor on to say, right, it's going to feel terrible, but it's not my fault. It's my responsibility to fill this out to the best of my ability. The better job I do, the more likely I am to get on first try. But it's hard. And I'm not stupid. It's just hard. And that kind of has to be your mantra as you go through these processes, because if you don't go in recognizing it, you're going to question yourself. You're going to doubt yourself. You're going to be even more upset, even more scared, even more anxious. Yeah, I know this is not fun stuff, but this is how you get the money that helps you have a life. This is how you get the health insurance that makes sure you can keep getting treated. This is what you have to do to survive and have a chance of thriving later. You need to get on these programs when you need them. And this is the kind of stuff you have to take to do to get there.
Another question that has to do with this,
Absolutely.
someone's asking, how much weight does the official medical evaluation have? And do you need to check in to see how the process is going, or is it best to wait to hear back from Social Security?
Okay. So, first of all, you do not always get examined by Social Security's doctors. Social Security's doctors only examine you if they, and again, this doesn't necessarily mean anything long term to your case, but Social Security has their doctors examine you only if they feel like they don't have enough medical information. So if you and your doctor are able to document things really well, you probably won't need to see one of Social Security's official doctors. If you do need to see a doctor, one of Social Security's doctors, you need to see them. And if you don't go, that's going to be a much blacker mark on your record than whatever happens at that appointment. But if you do go in and see their doctors, be prepared. The way that the bias works there is Social Security is a little more apt to keep the doctors who find that patients are not disabled. That doesn't mean that they're going to lie necessarily, but they're looking to weed out the people who are faking rather than looking to rule in a person's disability. It's just the way the system is primed because of the way people look at disability and people applying for Social Security disability benefits. As far as checking in, trying to check in with Social Security is another lesson in pain. Uh, they generally are not great about answering the phone. They are generally not great about giving information if you do get someone on the phone. So you can try to call back, but the most likely effect of that is that your own anxiety is going to increase even more. Because now not only do you not know what's happening, but you're also waiting for a phone call that may never happen and upset that they're not calling you back. So, in general, my recommendation is not to call Social Security unless you've got, like, you said I would hear in X amount of time. It's been twice that long. Could you let me know what's happening, please? Or here's some information I need you to have, things like that. If it's just, I did my exam, how did it come out? The chances of them actually telling you something useful is very, very low. So I wouldn't put myself through that stress.
Another question is about controversial diagnosis or hidden disability. And I think you've answered that with you're focusing on your function, not diagnoses.
Correct. It's the fact that I had F&D was not what got me coverage. It was the fact that I lost 2 jobs in a row because my movement symptoms were so severe that my employers felt it was unsafe for me to be there. Um, Things like that. It was, I had random movements. I couldn't control my legs. That was why I got on disability, because the movements were so unpredictable and so severe that it was unsafe. So when you've got a non-apparent disability, it's going to be your doctor backing up how much pain you're in, or backing up your repeated reports of cog fog. Whatever your symptoms are, however they are debilitating, especially in combination, that's the information that they most need. It's really not about your diagnosis, it's about your symptoms. So it's a tough. Oh, if you have medical update, I'm reading over the message from Kiki, or not Kiki, somebody else. I wrote a message about um I was reading something about like SSDI and multiple complicated things. If you have additional medical information, you want your lawyer to send the updated information in before your hearing and bring a copy when you go in. Because again, this is Social Security. They're infamous for losing documentation. So you send in a copy in advance, pray it gets there, and bring an extra copy in case it didn't. So my recommendation, you've got multiple things going on, send in update information before your hearing, if at all possible, so that they're looking at the most recent data, not just what was true a few months ago or a few years ago. You do want them updated, but you cannot, there's no guarantee that they'll actually get the information. An urban legend I heard about was somebody who prepared themselves so well for their case and had so much proof of how disabled they were that the judge refused to grant them disability because they were so organized and did such a good presentation. So I do not know if that is true, but it feels true. So you never lied on any of these. Just make sure they're aware, if your symptoms are variable, that your symptoms are variable. Let them know about good days versus bad days. In fact, I recommend when you fill out, okay, so the initial application you can mainly do online, and that includes giving your medical history. It includes giving your your basics of your employment history. And other than that, it's basically identifying type information. Once you send that in, and that's either you do it online, fill it out online, send it in online, or they mail you the paper forms. I don't recommend that because that's a lot of waiting for stuff you can get online. Or they call you and you verbally report to them, which can be really draining. And you also, if you do that, you want to ask them to send you a copy of the paperwork or a transcript so you can double check that for errors. Or online by phone, or you can go into the office and fill it out. The only time it might make sense to go into Social Security to fill it out is if your symptoms will be very visible to them because they may take notes of your symptoms as they interview you. Otherwise, I don't recommend going into the office because that's going to be a lot of waiting and a lot of extra stress for you. If you're comfortable typing or writing information, it's probably going to be best to just fill out the form online. But I do have lawyers I do know a lawyer or two who suggest doing it by phone because they then have the responsibility of writing it down. Personally, I like being able to think a little more, and they're asking for a lot of information. So you have to get those details together ahead of time anyway. But those are basically your options. And no matter what you're doing, you can go to ssa.gov, and that can help you get the ball rolling on starting the actual application process. A few days to weeks, because of how Social Security functions, after you send in that application, usually weeks to months, they then send some additional paperwork. And one is a more detailed work history. And that's where they ask about your physical activities while working, your mental activities while working, um, why you lost your jobs, things like that. And again, you answer it honestly. And if your disability had anything to do with why you couldn't continue to work, you make sure you explain that. Even if it was ableism by your boss, you say that. You just want them to see your disability has impacted you, if that's the case. Besides the employment paperwork, there also is usually a form for someone who knows you well to fill out. And that's someone you generally are identifying in that first round of paperwork. And they say there, make sure it's not a doctor or a case manager. And the reason for that is what they're really looking for is what you're like around your house on a day-to-day basis. So the best person to have fill that out is an observant person who either lives with you or visits very regularly, especially on bad days. The other big scary that I think people get the most anxious about is the one about activities of daily living. It's called the Adult Function Report. And that's the form that people really get into the soul crushing aspect of it. That form effectively is saying, hi, you tell us you're disabled. Tell us all of the ways in which your body has failed to function, your brain has failed to work, and you have failed as a human being so that we can rip apart all of your personal information. No, that's not actually what it says, but that's how it feels. And so they go everywhere from what could you do before your disability that you can't do now? which is, a great way to start crying, to um, describe your day from when you wake up to when you go to bed, to do you have problems with authority? Can you count change? What aspects of your life do you now need help or prompting with? Can you prepare your own food? If so, what? How has this changed? Household chores? Do you have pets? All kinds of things. But basically, what they're trying to get at is prove to us that you really can't take care of yourself. Prove to us that you're in such bad shape that you're spending all of your energy staying alive and you cannot work. Unfortunately, that is what you have to do, but you have to do it in a calm manner, and you have to do it with as much detail as you can manage without being overly wordy. Oh, and by the way, they give you like 5 lines to do it in for each question. So one of the things you need to know is you are not limited to the amount of space they give you on the form. You can add more pages if you need to. They call it remarks, and they've got a little remark section for if you go over. Expect to go over in multiple sections. Carefully label anywhere you go over. And if the way that you manage things can actually be done succinctly, cool. Maybe you only have an extra page or two. You don't want it to be like a novel, but you need to get your points across, and they are expected to read everything. That doesn't mean they do, but they are expected to. So, but they're also expected to do it all very quickly. So, again, it's about painting that picture, telling the story. Make sure that they, as abled people, can picture what you're telling them. So the important thing in writing this information down is let them know, no, really, this is bad. Paint the picture so they can't escape the conclusion that you need to be on disability. You do not exaggerate, you do not lie. You just also can't understate. Your instinct is going to be to understate it, because how can I tell someone whatever intimate bathroom detail you're dealing with, or that you're forgetting, your partner's name, or whatever it is for you that is really embarrassing, really upsetting, and really shameful. You don't need to tell them all the shameful and nasty bits, but you do need to tell them enough that they have an accurate picture. The other part is they're just going to say, tell us what your day is like. Every question, think about your worst days. You need to talk about your really bad days, because if you're working full time, you're going to have to try to work on a bad day. So they need to know what a bad day looks like. And that's how you have to answer these questions, with a bad day as your example and a bad day as your image. You can also, in that describe your day, have a bad day example and a good day example, so that they understand why you know, are still living on your own, or are still able to feed yourself, or whatever it is. You can say, I batch cook. Whatever you have to do to care for yourself, mention that too. So like I had a client who had to, on a good day, she ate 3 meals. On a bad day, she had to like do extra prep work and have like 5 small meals. And so I made sure she put that in, so they understood if her digestive system's having a bad day, there's all this extra work that she has to do. So you talk about how you manage things, how you balance things, how you're impacted, and you have to be able to do all these things, be that vulnerable, and then walk away and have a good cry or a good scream or whatever else you need to do. But you can't let that frustration show in your application.
We have a couple more questions here, Allison, and just
Mhm.
thank you so much for all the detail you're offering. So one is that the person says, I remember hearing years ago that almost all disability applications were denied the first time. Is that still the case? And
It's not,
then
I'm sorry.
Oh, and
It's
then just another one is that do you recommend that somebody always have an attorney, a lawyer for appeal if you've been denied?
okay. So for appeal, absolutely. I don't think you need an attorney until you're at the appeal stage. I know that the work that I do is actually to help people have the best chance of getting accepted on their initial application. If my client doesn't, I then help them think through finding a lawyer because you're going to need someone with that deep legal experience to help you with those next steps, who's very deeply connected with the social security system. And that's not me. I understand it. I've got a good sense of things, but the knowing which way to go, no, I don't know that. So I help people with that first stage and help them have that best chance of getting on. As far as the rejection rate, Social Security, your initial application is viewed as being for SSDI for the most part. So the rejection rate of applications right now, I think the acceptance, I've got a couple of different numbers, but the acceptance rate is somewhere between 23 and 38%. That's the acceptance rate of initial applications. So, yeah, it's not good. But over 40% of those rejections are what they call technical rejections, which are you're not eligible for this program. So, almost half of the rejections given are because the person applied even though they weren't eligible for SSDI benefits at all. So that does mean 60% were eligible and were rejected, but it's not quite as bad a number as it first sounds like because almost half of those applications that are rejected weren't eligible in the first place. Does that make sense? So is it low? Yes. The acceptance rate is low. It is slowly trending lower. And a big part of that is Social Security is underfunded. And so there's more and more pressure to reject and to claw back. And that's the beast we're living with right now. And so you acknowledge that and you keep going. The other part is each level of appeals, the rate of acceptance is higher and the number of applicants is about half. So the most important thing when applying for disability is actually to not give up. The more appeals you turn in, the better your chances of getting on it. Every round of an appeal, more people get on from their appeal than the appeal before that. So it's just kind of a have yourself be mentally ready. This tends to be a marathon, even if it's getting on first try. I got on incredibly fast, and that incredibly fast was 8 months. That was unbelievably fast. Like people couldn't believe it when I told them, "Oh yeah, I applied 8 months ago and I got on," and they're like, "How?" So, and it's gotten a lot worse since then. So, yeah, it's
You, sorry, do you have a sense of like how long the average wait period is? Like kind of both from like applying to hearing back, but also like the wait period from like applying to rejection to appeal to hearing, all kind of all those layers?
Okay, so it varies by um, office, but overall, in general, very rough averages. Initial application to the second part of the application is going to be measured usually in weeks, occasionally in months. If you don't hear in a month or so, that's when you kind of go, hey, did you forget me? You also actually can go and download the two most difficult of those applications, the adult function report and the uh, detailed work history by those names from Social Security if you wanted to like get started on those. So like if you send in that initial application and you're like, I want to be prepared, because usually when they send you the request for more information, they say, and we'd like this back in 15 days. Thank you. And that piles on the stress. So what I advise my clients to do is after you get the initial application done and in, give yourself a few days or a week or two, depending on how exhausted you are, and then start pecking away, start chipping away at the big nasties so that when you get the actual letter, you're already prepared and you might already be more than halfway through. But from sending in the completed application to actually hearing back, like I said, for me, that was probably 7 months or so, and that was very fast in 2004. You might get an initial rejection if you apply for both SSI and SSDI for one or the other pretty quickly, because that's a financial question, not a medical question. But the actual, are you eligible for the thing you're supposed to be eligible for? My sense is hearing within a year would be pretty decent. So that probably would be a year or two. Probably less than 2, but no guarantees. And then appeals, it is based on judge availability, basically. And some states do extra levels in between. So like in some states, like New Jersey has it where you send in the initial application. If it's rejected, you can make an appeal that basically says, I think you made a mistake. Could you have somebody else on your staff read over it? And that takes a little extra time. And then if they still decide that you're not disabled enough, then you get assigned an administrative law judge, where other states don't have that in between step. That step will take a few months. Probably, I'd say 6 months would be lucky. And I think expecting it to be a year-ish between judge hearings, year, 18 months, probably isn't unreasonable. So this is a very long, very drawn-out process. And most of what you're doing is waiting. The key things are, when you're waiting, you need to keep up on your medical information, keep seeing doctors, keep gathering more proof that you're too disabled to work, and you can't approach substantial gainful activity. Because if you do, they go, oh, you're not too disabled to work because you earned money. That's like the toughest part. You also can't go back to school, at least not full time, because that's viewed as equivalent to full-time work. I would say it's probably iffy even to go to school part-time while you're waiting. Once you're on disability, that's a different matter. Because I went to grad school well on my benefits. That was actually part of why I went back and begged and pleaded so hard, because I'd just gotten into grad school after starting some work. And I knew I could barely maintain the work I was doing. I definitely couldn't do grad school and any work. So I needed my benefits to support me through grad school. I did all my courses part-time, and that was totally acceptable. But that was after I was on. I would not have gone to school while applying for or waiting for benefits. The other really important thing in that application process is your onset of disability date, which is the day that you became too disabled to work. That's also the day that your payments start. Social Security backdates your payments to when your disability started. So all of that time that you're waiting, you eventually will get paid for if they determine that you're disabled. The question is, what day did your disability start? What month, really, but what day did your disability start? For people who are like in a car accident or something, there you go, there's your date. But with chronic conditions like what we're managing, you want to, when you apply, have in your head when you became too disabled to work. And that's not always easy either. But you want to have a date in mind and run with that. And that can be the last day that you worked. It can be when your hours were cut. It can be when you got diagnosed. There's all kinds of things that could be your day, but it's after your payments go down. Yeah, it's like I said, the applying for disability stuff is tough, but when you need it, it's your best option. And the scariest part is that really long wait where you don't know what's going to happen, and you just got to keep trying and keep yourself going. So yeah, it's rough stuff. I just noticed the time.
Do you have any closing words of wisdom for those who are going through the process?
Yes. The most important thing through the whole process is to take care of yourself. You'll need to protect yourself. You need to recognize this is going to be really rough on your mental and emotional health. Recognize that if your condition is stress responsive, which many of these are, it may also trigger an uptick in your symptoms or a relapse. You have to think about, when you're making the decision of whether or not to apply, you have to think about, can I actually maintain the work I'm doing, or is the work I'm doing hurting me? If the answer is that work is hurting you, it's worth the effort to apply for disability so that you're not going to keep making yourself worse. And that, I think, is the biggest thing. People don't want to admit they're disabled. People don't want to identify as disabled. It's really painful and hard to do so. We've all internalized all of the ableist messaging we've absorbed. So if you're thinking about applying for disability, you probably should have quite a while ago. And you have to make that balance with yourself about the wait to get on versus the damage you're doing to yourself by trying to keep working when you really can't or shouldn't be. My other big thing is I'm writing, as we mentioned, I'm writing a book. It's called Thriving While Disabled, Navigating Disability Finances. This is one of the topics I cover. We've touched on material that's in 2 or 3 chapters of the book. And the book is basically a user's manual for living with a disability, with everything from let's understand history and ableism and classism to these are the programs that can help you get housing. And this is why people need to think about marriage and children and topics like that with a disability and looking at all of that from a disabled perspective. I'm very excited about it. It's going to be out on April 12th, which is the day before FND Awareness Day, FND being the condition that's why I'm on disability. And yes, I'm still on it. And my goal with my business is to eventually earn my way off of it, but I need to do it slowly and carefully and staying within all of Social Security's rules. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Alison. This was wonderful, informative, gave us some great resources too. Thank you.